Hi, and welcome to the podcast Making Sense, brought to you by Navy Federal Credit Union. I'm your host, Emily Bigham, and each week I'll be taking your questions to the experts to help you make sense of your money, pun intended. It's almost Valentine's Day, and love is in the air. So today we're talking about romance scams, something we tend to see more often around this time of the year when people are looking for connection, starting relationships online. And while this topic can feel uncomfortable, it's an important conversation because awareness really does make a difference. To help us dig into this, I'm joined by Carrie Foran Sepulveda, Vice President of Fraud and Physical Security Strategy at Navy Federal. Carrie leads a team that works closely with members every day, both behind the scenes and directly, to help protect their financial security and support them when something just doesn't feel right. Carrie, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get into warning signs and prevention tips, let's start with a real conversation. Romance scams can affect anyone. Carrie, you and your teams talk to members during some of their most stressful moments. Can you share why this topic matters to you personally, or maybe a moment that really shaped how you think about fraud and the responsibility that we at Navy Federal have to our members?
We had a really interesting member case, a woman who was unfortunately caught up in a romance scam, had met somebody online, got into a relationship, and over time, that scammer persuaded her to send a pretty serious amount of money to him. In the aftermath of that, she sort of had come to terms with the fact that she wasn't going to be able to get her money back, but she was really motivated to try to bring the scammer to justice and also to try to prevent that scammer from being able to con other people. And so I was very impressed with her diligence and her organization. She sent us a ton of evidence. She sent all of the bank information, screenshots of everything that had gone back and forth, including sort of the entire text conversation that she had, and sent it to us, sent it to law enforcement. And what I thought was really amazing about it, what really stuck with me, was I really took the time to read everything that she'd sent to us and seeing the conversation, right? It's easy to say, how did you not spot the red flags? Well, this person was very astute. She had spotted some, but the scammer was incredibly persistent and incredibly persuasive. So you could see in the text conversation where the emotional attachment started to form once that scammer could feel the trust, began to try to exploit it. When she would say, this doesn't seem quite right, or why can't you talk to me on video? Why can't we? When will you be able to come visit? Those things that didn't add up. Whenever she pushed back or had doubts, she was very direct with the person and would share those doubts, but they would assuage her fears. They would talk to her and then really focus on the relationship for a little while and then wait to bring that conversation back to money, back to the scam. And so you could just see this play out over the weeks of conversation, that you can see how it really does happen in real time and what it really feels like as that person, because it wasn't that the whole time she was buying it hook, line, and sinker. She had these doubts. They tried to answer them pretty well. It was still, they could never quite clear the hurdle, but they would bring her back in. They would be really conscientious of how much trust they had to have in the relationship to be able to succeed with their scam. So I just thought it was really wonderful that she was able to turn such a bad experience into something that she was trying to empower herself and help others with. And it was just a really good lesson for me in sort of getting to actually see. We don't always get to see, we hear the summary, but we rarely get to see sort of the full interaction. But that full interaction really reminded me how much it's possible for anybody to fall for these scams and how good these scammers are, right? They are professional con artists. This is what they do. And so it's not the same as another just person walking down the street tricking you, right? This is what they do for a living. They're highly motivated and they have a deep skill set in it, and they're committed and they're in it for the long haul in a way that I think is hard to fully wrap your head around just how serious of a threat these can be once they get that first initial trust built with you, how hard it is to break that off.
I agree. That's really brave of her to come forward and talk about it. And you mentioned it can be a very emotional connection. And typically when we think about finances, it's, we're thinking logically. We have, our spreadsheets and we have our tools. And when someone does kind of wrap you into that emotional side, it just takes 1 second, right? One transfer, one click of a button, and then it's kind of like, how did we get here? So definitely appreciate her sharing that story, and for you sharing that story. What do you wish more people understood about fraud before they ever experience it?
I think when it comes to scams, I think it's that it's not any one type of person who's vulnerable. There's certainly plenty of vulnerable populations, but I think if we can all take a sort of a step back and really think about ourselves with some humility, that we all have those moments of vulnerability, right? Whether it's a time when you felt lonely in your life, you've been in a moment of transition or going through something difficult. These scammers are experts at finding somebody who's experiencing that vulnerability. So you don't need to be somebody who's in a particular age group or anything else, right? no matter how smart and educated, no matter how sophisticated you think you are, all of us will go through moments in life where there's vulnerability. And that's when the scammers, if they can get through to that first initial creation of trust with you, you can become really vulnerable. And it's just very interesting knowing that it truly can happen to anybody. So that when we think about how do we help people, who are we targeting, we want to make sure we have a lot of respect for scam victims and understanding just how easy it is to fall for these things, and that we all need to think about how we can fight this problem together. Navy Federal, from our position as a financial institution, but we do a lot of work with other groups across industries. So things like dating websites, the social media companies, all these different places where these connections are formed, because typically, right, that connection is forming and then it's coming over into the financial side. So it's really thinking about what that holistic solution needs to be so we can fight this sort of crime.
So it is February, right? Valentine's Day is in February. So it's a time when many people, even members, are looking for love or connection. So Carrie, can you help us set the stage? What exactly is a romance scam?
So a romance scam is one where they're using that personal relationship as the hook to get somebody drawn into the scam, right? There's other ones where maybe they just start with the investment. They're trying to get your, maybe a little bit of greed, a little get rich quick. Oh, you can, 10x your investment. But romance scams always kind of start with that personal approach, right? I think we all know, I always think when I talk about this topic, I'm like, well, I've been to a lot of weddings of people who met online. But at the same time, when you're meeting someone online, totally, right? Modern age, that's totally how relationships start for many of us. But knowing that it's that different one, that you start with that, what feels like a normal, just seeking out a relationship, seeking out connection. And then the person who's doing it is not representing themselves as their true selves. This is somebody who's coming in. They could be in a scam compound in Southeast Asia. They themselves could be a victim of human trafficking doing this, but that you're really meeting somebody or the idea of somebody on a dating platform. And then they're starting that relationship. And then they take that relationship once they have that trust and connection and pivot it into a scam. Most commonly, we see that it ends up being a crypto scam. So they set up entire fake websites that will look very real. I mean, you see screenshots of this stuff, and it's not like it's the scams of old where it's a terribly written email that makes no sense, right? This is a slick looking website. They are moving things. Sometimes they will move money back and forth. So you get the trust that, like, I moved money in, I moved money out. So they can get you to put more and more money in, and then it never comes back out. And then even when you're realized, perhaps you've had that horrible moment, you realize this relationship wasn't real. So not only are you dealing with the fact that emotionally you thought maybe you had found your person or you're in a really good place, you're feeling less lonely. Now you've got that betrayal. And in addition, you realize I've sent them $30,000 from my retirement account. How am I going to get that back? And then all of a sudden, if you can even get a hold of them anymore, the tone starts to be, well, to get that out, you sent this money to another country, you're going to have to pay taxes, of course. And there's import fees. And so they try to, even when they realize that they've lost you and they're not going to be able to get you to send any more sort of bulk in quote unquote investment money into it, they're still going to see if they can get you out another 200, 300, 500, anything else for these fees. And all the stuff is all just one more payment and you'll get your money back. One more payment and this will happen. And that's just the way for them to sort of put the icing on the cake of their scam and be able to get even that little last bit of money out. And you're never going to get the principal out. But that's really what defines the romance scam, is the initial contact and initial trust is coming from that idea of forming a fake relationship and then pivoting that to persuade somebody to invest. Typically in crypto, that's how it kind of goes.
Maybe it's harder to track. And so
harder to track. I think there's just a different expectation that the person has about, like, where would they see this money. Some scams might do things where it's a little bit more like, oh, you love me so much, but oh, I'm actually a deployed service member and I really need help with my flight home, which our deployed service members, we're gonna take care of them. They don't need help from random people they've met on the internet to be flown home from their deployments. That's not how that works. But things like that, where so sometimes it will be maybe a little bit smaller scale, and they'll be looking to be able to convince you to send money to help them. So sometimes they'll try to do the help. I think you see the crypto scams a little bit more often because I think the narrative makes more sense to say, oh, you're investing in this. Maybe you'd say, hey, this is a new relationship. I can't be cashing out my 401k to pay for you to come to visit me or to invest in your business or whatever story they've told. It tends to be a little more believable if you first have the relationship and then, oh, like, I've got this great crypto thing. Oh, you can make this money. And again, they'll go through these exercises where they're showing you your account. Oh, look, the balance really did go up. okay, maybe they'll send a little bit of money back to you so you have that trust. But they tend to do it with the crypto idea because, yeah, it's harder to hide. There's less of an expectation. You aren't expecting that money to be at a US-based financial institution. The victim is already being set up to assume that that one website is really the only place where they'd be able to see and acknowledge that money, which kind of allows the scam to work a little bit longer versus other things where you might start to say this really isn't tracking anymore a bit sooner, when it tends to be for an expense or a, oh, buy this thing from abroad and it's never coming, and just gets the scale a little bit higher and again convinces people
Right.
they're missing out. They could have a beautiful retirement if they just moved whatever they have in savings now. What if they had 10 times that for their retirement? What a difference that would make. And they persuade people with that lure of, a great relationship, financial security, a great opportunity. Aren't you so smart to realize that you could make all this money? You're an investor. All of these things that help people really make people feel good about themselves. And then they use it against them, and it's all just a farce.
I mean, listening to you kind of talk through these stories and different scenarios, it's almost like a movie. It's kind of unbelievable. And I can imagine how the impact would just be completely devastating. And like you said, you've been to weddings where several of the couples have met online. And so if that's something that you're kind of working towards, right, you want to be in a relationship, you have hope. And I feel like that sense of hope is also probably kind of leading you towards the person who's scamming you. And there's also so many different stories of people who've met online that have ended wonderfully. And so, maybe you're kind of talking to someone about it and they're like, well, I don't know, I heard this case of XYZ. So definitely important that we're talking about this. Like you said, these scams don't happen overnight, right? There's a lead up. There's, I'm sure, very different stages. So what are some of the key tactics or red flags that people should be looking out for or to potentially recognize?
When I think about romance scams, I think the most important thing is no matter who you might be getting into a relationship with, if you're going to have a serious emotional commitment with somebody, there is absolutely no reason why you, one, should be sending them serious amounts of money in the first few months in any event. I would just say that's probably good advice, regardless of whether it's one of these complex scams or just not getting taken advantage of. So think about that. The second one is you should be able to meet someone in person, right? If you're meeting somebody online, I would say that it's very risky if the goal of that is not to move to an in-person relationship, right? Be patient. If somebody said they were in another location and they were going to come to see you, like that needs to be that they figure out how to do that on their own, and you actually meet them in person and actually talk to them and have an in-person interaction where you're sure it's a real human being, that human being, their actual interactions with you match up to all those conversations that you've had. I mean, some of this is just maybe decent relationship advice of you want to make sure before you make any commitment, financial or emotional, that you are really making sure it's the true person. But the things where there's a lot of different stories about all the taxes to get somewhere. They're always somewhere far away. They're frequently unavailable. There's all these elements that, again, there's probably some noise where it's more maybe dishonest people just in the relationship overall. But then those are also really good signals for these are places where you might really be encountering somebody who's looking to perpetrate a scam. But yes, gift cards, crypto, anything where it starts to be unconventional payments, not really trackable. Like how would you figure out where this money went if you had to later? If everything they're asking for can't really be traced quite right, that is, think about the types of things that somebody is asking for as well. But I would just say, in general, don't get caught up in a romantic, dramatic story about everybody's international and it's hard to get to one another. And there's always another big drama. I think most people live normal lives and have normal relationships with somebody who probably lives somewhat near them. They will actually meet them in person. They don't need a ton of money, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to be able to meet in the first place. All those things are just things where you have to really guard your heart against, again, sometimes it becomes this very sweeping, dramatic narrative that's so easy to kind of get caught up in. But to realize that that's not what most relationships like for most people. The people I know who met online, they went on a date after talking for a couple of weeks and they live in the same city. There was some pretty clearly real stuff, pretty clear on. So I think it's just an interesting that's knowing that just, does this really make sense? And I think maybe holding oneself a little bit like, I might want some big grand love story, but like it doesn't usually start with only online and no video calls and having to pay a bunch of weird taxes. Those are all some big red flags.
Yeah. I mean, the no video calls thing that is just, I mean, I can understand if people can't meet in person immediately, but the video calls and then, like you said, the urgency around these emergencies, or I mean, if there's a pattern of these crazy things happening when you maybe ask a pressing question or a question that might not even shouldn't really be pressing, right? You ask one question and they, you know, they can't respond because of XYZ. But it is interesting how much patience goes into this, right? So, you know, you mentioned that the relationship may last weeks or months before money is ever mentioned. But, you know, really also having patience yourself to be like, okay, it's only been these number of weeks, or, you know, like, what have we done to actually make that personal connection, the video or in person, before taking the financial steps? Usually finance isn't the first thing that people are talking about at the beginning of a relationship.
Yeah, you might want to pump the brakes on that, especially
right.
You know,
unless they have a lot of money
early on. I do think one thing that maybe our members will be thinking about is this idea of like AI and deep fakes and what all that could mean for this space. I would say that right now, right, it's a pretty decent lift to get a really good deep fake going. So it's not as common. I won't say that it doesn't exist, but I would say that over time it will become increasingly that I will, you know, if we talk this time next year, my advice may shift a little bit towards saying like, even the video chat, like you really need to be able to think about, was that enough? Right? What were you able to spot or not spot in terms of a deep fake, right? Because you don't, if it's supposed to be someone you don't know, as long as it looks like a realistic video, it doesn't have to look like a realistic video of somebody you know. So there's a lot of opportunity for even AI video things to be becoming more and more persuasive. So I would say that even a video call might still be suspicious. And then when I think about that patience that you mentioned, Emily, when you think about what AI and chatbots can do, now this is starting to scale more and more, that the long thread of long conversations, weeks or months of investment before any money moves, that is getting, just like how every business everywhere is looking to do things efficiently and make it work really well. The scammers are doing that too, right? They're going to get AI chatbots. So before they had to get somebody to send all those text messages, now they have AI chatbots who can do it, which those chatbots are perfectly able to talk to you anytime you want to. They can be patient. The cost of them being patient is much less than having a human have to work back and forth to create that right feeling in their relationship. So that's another threat where just sort of that idea of, again, whether it's a true scam or even just not a real person, I think really thinking about what does it mean to interact with another person and how do I make sure they're really there?
So whether it's a chatbot or a real person, would it be possible to take that conversation, copy and paste it into maybe one of your own AI tools and ask, like, do you think this is real? Do you think that this is a fake person? Maybe they can notice patterns. Or could you record, you know, a FaceTime call and then also share that and say, like, do you think this is a deep fake? Because I've heard of people doing that to see if they think that the conversation or the text is actually from a real person.
Yeah, I think those are definitely good places. Like if you start to feel like you're not sure or something feels a little suspicious, like give it a try. I don't think I could really guarantee that any tools are perfect at detecting that now, but certainly you could attempt. You could certainly try to do some reverse image searching and things like that to see, oh, that person is just an animated stock photo from somewhere. You might get an easy win there. But I would say listen to your gut. If you get to the point where you're thinking this doesn't feel right, and you want to use AI to figure out if it's AI, that's good. I wouldn't say don't do it. Definitely do your research. But I would say really listen to yourself. Trust your gut that something about that made you think this just doesn't feel right. And you're probably more intuitive than you give yourself credit for. And the key is listening. And I think the hardest part for lots of times with scam victims is when did that red flag get clear enough for you to see? And then how do you sort of go through that process for yourself to reconcile, like, okay, I've already lost a bunch of money. I pre-federal, we will try to send hold harmless and do things to try to get that money back. But if you send it to an anonymous person in another country who probably has a fake account in crypto, it's just not the kind of money that can be gotten back. So just really like having to go through the emotional acceptance that you're probably out that money and the relationship was fake. And, are you going to feel comfortable? Do you have support in your life to be able to say, hey, this is what happened, and really talk to somebody? Because it's a big thing to process and accept if you've been wrong about that. But one of the other things I'd say, sort of akin to trusting your gut when you start to feel those red flags, is talk to people, right? Like if you think you've met someone online and they sound great, like make sure you're working on your own friendships and family relationships. So you have somebody you can say, does this sound crazy? Like, am I just falling in love? And that's great. That's happened to all of us, right? It's a wonderful part of life. But hey, does this person seem real? Am I like infatuated with them? Or is this like even the story starts to not make sense? So I really think having somebody that you can trust that could say, hey, take a look, do record a FaceTime, save some screenshots or be willing to share a text or two. Have it be something where you know who's somebody else who isn't going to be wrapped up in the emotion of this, who can give me a sort of dispassionate look at whether or not it feels real to them. And then you got to force yourself to trust it, right? If your friends and family are saying, I just don't think this is real, it feels really shady to me, taking the time to listen.
Outside perspective is always for anything that you're going through, right? Outside perspective, and don't be, ashamed or, embarrassed, because everyone has been there at some point, right? Like there's fraud and scams happen all over the place, not just romance scams, but fraud in general. What are some practical steps that people can take to protect themselves from romance scams, other fraud?
Sure. Yeah. So we have lots of security tips. If members are listening to this and want to go look on our website, we have lots of different things in our Making Sense library to help people understand some tools. But some ones that I would highlight would be if you have sort of on the scam side, where again, avoiding the calls, excuses where they can't meet, a lot of money, and you've never really actually been with that person in person, you haven't seen them. I would be nervous about that. That urgency that doesn't make sense, emergencies, crises, anything where it's all very dramatic. Take a pause on that. Again, the other last sort of piece would be any requests where we're seeing it's like the gift cards, unconventional payment methods, crypto, things where it's like, hey, if I sent that, how would I ever be able to get that back? Who else would even know that that money moved? It's a little too anonymous. Keeping those things in mind. When it comes to fraud and sort of just general good security advice, and there's some things we always encourage our members to do, which is have secure passwords, change them, use a password manager if you can. Make sure that you are always locking your screens and your devices, putting two-factor authentication in place. One thing, maybe akin to some of the things we've just discussed, but sometimes also think low tech. For example, some of these scams, maybe not so much the romance scams, but the ones where they're pretending your family member has gotten called and they were in a DUI and they were the driver and they've hurt somebody, very dramatic. My grandparents actually got this call once. And so we have been through it. Obviously a scam, not real. They luckily called me and we shut it down before anything happened. But in those ones, one of the things we encourage is just keep it simple. Have a family code word. Like, what is the code word that you can say that if you were even in an accident, what's that thing that you and your family member would be like, I could say this and know that it's you, so that forget that trying to figure out if it's a deep fake or AI or all these things. Is it a scam? Only my brother, only my parents, only my grandparents would know this word would mean it's for real me. And you need to take this seriously. Or if a scammer couldn't come up with that, would be very clear it wasn't them. So I think sometimes taking a pause on all the technology, even though that's critical and there's amazing things we're doing at Navy Federal and to keep you secure, taking a step back and remembering that the personal relationships are oftentimes what makes or breaks the ability for somebody to scam you.
I really like the word that that it's real. I think I'm going to start using that. What other small habits? Checking your accounts regularly to make sure that money hasn't been transferred.
Putting on transaction notifications. I feel like it's one of those ones I have them totally turned on, right? So I'm getting text push notifications. Like every time I make a purchase, everything lights up. And sometimes it feels like overkill. Like, why am I getting so many alerts? I know I just paid for that. Of course, I know I paid for it. But when they light up and I haven't paid for something, that tells, like, that's the whole point, right? It should always be like, okay, I pay, I get all these confirmations, life is good. But if I were to get a whole bunch of those, I should be concerned. There was a subscription I forgot I had signed up for. And I was like, who is this person? How is somebody stealing money? I was sure I had fraud. And then I took a second. I was like, oh, no, I know what I signed up for. It was somebody, a great recipe blog I'd signed up for, which is fine. I'm happy to pay that person for her content. But it was one of those ones where I had not just physically done a transaction. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I got those alerts and it really was like, I do know what this is. It was something that was preset. But that's the idea that you're training yourself to get used to. When I pay, I get all these confirmations. I'm used to getting these. But if I got them and I wasn't immediately associating it with a transaction I knew I was doing, it would tell me I needed to go and look into things. So that's a great way to spot fraud on your accounts for sure.
Yeah, I do that too. Every time there's a certain dollar amount of a purchase, it always notifies me. Yeah, sometimes I want to turn it off because I'm like, don't remind me that I spent this much money on this thing, and I continue to do so. But when there is that, question of like, is this me? Is this not me? It's been very, very helpful. So if somebody realizes that they've been targeted or impacted, or maybe they think that they've been impacted, how do we support them here at Navy Federal?
So with scams, I think the most important thing to do, right, is to capture whatever information you can of where things have been sent. Call us. One of the things we'll try our very best to do, again, it gets harder when you send crypto to another country, things like that. It does start to get hard to track. But if you're in the situation where maybe you've sent a wire or something somewhere, we can't always get it back, but we will reach out to that other financial institution for you. So we'll do whatever we can to try to recover funds. Unfortunately, when you send the money yourself, you are liable. That's an industry standard. So I think that's important for people to understand the difference between a scam where you did it, so you are liable, versus fraud where somebody else did it and you did not do it at all. Then that's when Navy Federal or your other financial institution would have the financial liability. So I think being aware of the difference and then knowing what to do. But if you've given any information about card numbers, passwords, code words, immediately call us and whatever other financial institutions that you might have interacted with that included this scam and start shutting things down, changing them, and so that you can kind of get a fresh start, get new accounts and things like that, so that there's no trails of information that scammer would ever have to come back and try to scam you again.
Is there like a government agency or some sort of watchdog that you should also make aware in case these scammers are also reaching out to other people? Similar to, I know, like with insurance fraud, I know there's like a specific number that you call. Is there one for this type of fraud as well?
Yeah, so it's called IC3 is sort of the first place that we'd report it to. That's in the government, so you can search IC3 and you'll find it. You can report the scam there. You can report it to FTC if it was over the phone, things like that. You can certainly call local law enforcement. We're definitely in a place in our country where we're working on better ways to respond to this. We have all these tools. If nothing else, just like the member I talked about at the beginning, it's worth trying to share this information because the more clear examples and evidence that law enforcement and financial institutions get and the government get in general, the more things we have to know what avenues we can try to fight against. So it's really important to share that information. You can get your police report, all those things, just so that if there's any chance, we have it there. And the best case or the worst case is we can't get your money back, but we have this information so we can try to stop this from happening again and see if we can bring those people to justice who've committed these crimes.
Yes, absolutely. And, like we said, it's February. Romance scams are on the rise, especially during these times when people are seeking connection and online, right? So knowing the red flags, slowing down when something feels urgent, checking your accounts regularly, and, asking other people's perspective. I think those are all really great tips. And having a trusted financial partner matters. Like you mentioned, here at Navy Federal, we are committed to protecting our members' financial security. We offer that real support when it's needed. When you call, you're talking to real people. And we want to help you move forward with confidence. So, Carrie, thank you so much for sharing your insights today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Emily.
And to our listeners, share this episode with someone you care about. Awareness really can prevent harm. Stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you next time.
Navy Federal Credit Union is federally insured by the National Credit Union Administration. This podcast is intended to provide general information and shouldn't be considered legal, tax, or financial advice. It's always a good idea to consult a tax or financial professional for specific information on how certain laws may apply to your individual financial situation. References to and participation with the military community does not constitute organizational endorsement. Navy Federal is an equal housing lender. Navy Federal Credit Union are members of the mission.